Well, you look great, and
Oh,
welcome back.
thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So, getting into a little bit of your background, I want to start with where the film ended, which is one of your most famous quotes. It says, "I'm spiritually 6,000 years old. I'm mentally 98."
Yes, emotionally five, and you can see that because I got so moved listening to you. I'm very emotional. So that's the five part,
Okay.
5 years old.
It's a curious quote. It's a curious
Yeah.
quote. And
It
while
just
it
came
has.
instinctively to me. This was in a quote. The first time I said it was to Philip Oakes in the London Times. And for some odd reason, I forget, they used to always wonder how old I am. And I was a little fed up of explaining to them. So I guess I just said, well, I'm 6,000 years spiritually, I'm mentally 98. I mean, but I meant it because, in the Hindu culture, to be born, I'm born into a particular family called the Saraswat Brahmins. And that particular community, well, I was told that to be born a Brahmin, you cannot be converted into Hinduism as such, and that to be born, you had to have at least 6,000 years of existence before. So I guess subconsciously that was in my head, and I said, well, I'm spiritually 6,000 in that case, and mentally 98 because when I was very young, I used to read a lot, like like things that I don't know why, but I did read André Gide, Kessler, Dostoevsky, you name it, Sartre, not just European, but also Indian, literature. But since I went to an English speaking school, of course, my Indian literature was not as deep and as, yeah. But
So I want to tie this a little bit back. Now you said you are from a particular type of family. Now when we speak about specifically the Saraswat Brahmins, it's the Konkan coast and
mhm,
Maharashtra with the
mhm,
Kula Sangeet tradition.
yes.
Kula Sangeet has to do with clan or family lineages of music,
Mhm.
and you've grown up steeped in this.
Not really, no,
So you were
no.
trained in classical music in your
Well,
Bombay years.
my sister was studying Indian classical from. Actually, he was called Gandharva. His full title was Guni Gandharva Pandit Lakshman Prasad
Your
Jaipurwale.
teacher.
My teacher. That was my sister's teacher, and I used to love him. And she had the most amazing. She still has most amazing voice, and so I was inspired by her really, and that's how um, I studied that, and then I was fascinated by opera. So I studied opera from a wonderful woman in Dadar called Hyacinth Brown, and she, had me sit for the Royal Associated School of Music, where they come here, as they did in those days. If you sat for your Cambridge exam, they'd come from
Yeah.
England to take
Yeah.
your exam. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you
And
spoke about the teacher with as a Gandharva, this lineage of Gandharvas, this mythology around Gandharvas and
mhm,
Apsaras
mhm.
has to do with artists who have trained across many lifetimes and
Yes.
rebirths. So
Yeah.
that ties nicely in with how you have somewhat sought cosmic identity. You've kind of like looked out to outer space and
Yeah.
being, a little elevated beyond what would be the human experience. So
Yeah.
there's a foundation around the whole classical arts in India that has very
Absolutely.
much to do with the artist as a medium
Yeah.
to the divine.
Yes.
Yeah, extending
Absolutely.
beyond the
Yes.
mortals.
Yeah.
So the classical training, whether it was in the Hindustani classical or with the opera, did
Mhm.
it give you a foundation? Do you feel it gave you a foundation that let you explore well beyond into outer
I
space, into
think
the
so.
cosmic
I think
identity?
music is a spiritual experience. No matter what kind of music, it is a spiritual experience. And I think it's in the Rig Veda where it says that if you, I hope I remember it correctly, but it goes, if you want to master the art of image making, you have to first master the art of sculpture. And if you want to master the art of sculpture, you have to then master the art of dance. I mean, it goes on. If you want to master the art of dance, then you've got to master the art of music. And if you master the art of music, that's really the basis. So it starts from there. Then,
So, um, you once said, and I'm quoting you, you're an artist. Normality must have been so challenging for you, unquote. do you
Yes.
do you believe that? Do you believe
Oh,
as an
yeah.
artist your your differentiation as a person, your personality, do you think it makes you so different as to be out of a context? Is that what was happening to you in Bombay at the time that
Oh,
you were here?
absolutely. I think most artists, not just me, but every artist, I think, would probably feel that way. Yeah, because they you know go with a different beat.
Yeah.
They go to the beat of a different drummer.
Yeah, you have spoken to being circular instead of geometric and that you
Yes.
march to a different beat. So we know that there is a uniqueness to what you brought. There was a uniqueness in your experience that rendered you able to approach things with a very differentiated engagement. Yeah. So we
Yes.
are looking at this uniqueness that there was also a rebellion against what your
Yes.
context was. Women your
Absolutely.
age and in say 1969, which is when you left and went stateside,
Hmm.
at that time were mostly being married. It would have been an arranged marriage, and you
Hmm.
would have been married off into a
True.
family.
True.
But you chose to do something pretty radical for the
Well,
times.
most people, I guess, of my generation, if there are any here, we usually, my sister included, my brother too, we all had arranged marriages. And by the time you were 18, you graduated from college, and the next thing was you got married and had children and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but the rebellion really was because, and I think one of the reasons I got so attracted to jazz was not just the fact that there's a tremendous similarity between Indian classical and jazz. There's the whole thing about the improvisation, the minor chords, the free form, the liberalness about the art, that particular form, which attracted me to jazz. But it was also the fact that it came from a repressed people. Jazz is belongs to the Black American experience. So I think deep down inside that may have been subconsciously something that attracted me because I felt women were a suppressed creature here, suppressed, I'm sorry. Sometimes I get a little stumble for words. I'm glad we're doing this now before I get too old. But, it's making you laugh. It's not making me laugh, I tell you.
Well, it's a very timely statement you've made, where that you
Yeah.
said that you related to jazz
The
as a Black American
experience. Yeah.
experience because they, yes, it comes from oppression very much. Yeah, you could have
Hmm.
related well to it because
Hmm.
of what the feminine experience in India has been.
Yeah, the
So,
control factor, and especially if you're an artist, we are sort of like wild horses. We are very liberal in our way of thinking, and most artists, therefore, are socialists or call themselves Democrats, you
yeah,
know, because we're very liberal in our way of thinking.
yeah.
Yeah,
So did you feel restricted in Bombay,
absolutely.
1969?
Yes, yes, of course.
So
And I just told you, my parents wanted me to go to a specific college. I wanted to go to JJ School of Arts. You'll probably know it's right here, or Sophia
yeah.
College, or Xavier's. And my parents said, "Oh, no, no, you're getting too wild here." They sent me to Baroda, to MS University. And it was to the home economics department so that I would learn how to cook and sew, I guess. But no, I'm joking. They taught child psychology and nutrition and foods and stuff like that. But yeah, but that was the underlying thing.
So
Hmm.
your compulsion was to get out. You wanted to get out.
I
You
did.
felt you want.
Yes, I did. I wanted to, once I heard jazz music, which was on the Voice of America, and it used to come only at a specific time at night. And I said, gosh, this is so amazing what they're doing. So I said, I would love to combine Indian classical with jazz and form like a third stream music. That was sort of an inspiration from MJQ, who had done that sort of stuff. And um, so that's it. What was
Yeah.
it?
To get out, to
To
get
get
out.
out.
And jazz was
So
your calling. It was
I
jazz that was
felt,
saying, come
yeah,
on
I
out,
wanted to
come on out,
go
come
and say
play.
I wanted to sing jazz and go there and meet real jazz musicians and stuff like that. Yeah, that I felt I must do that.
So this is when this kind of break happened with what was traditional and linear and home and family. Did you know that like this is it? If I want to do something, if I want to get out and make music the way I want to make it, it means having to leave all of this behind. Was that your
And you know,
thought?
it never strikes you when you're young. And any artist who's in this crowd, when you have a certain passion and a desire, you have to go for it. And you have to go for it so completely because with that passion, you can manifest anything you want. Anything you want. And I mean that. Because for me, it's amazing. It was almost like the planets were in conspiracy with my thoughts. Anything I desired came my way. It was strange. So, what happened was when I was 18 and after graduation, how I got out is what you want to know, obviously, right?
Yeah, what happened? How did that happen? How did you make it
So,
out?
when I was 18, my dad had given me a car, and my neighbor, who was much older than I was, and I admired tremendously, and I'd applied to every university at this point. I've graduated from Baroda. I've applied to Juilliard, Syracuse, all the American universities, Berkeley. And they all wrote back and said, sorry, we don't have scholarships for jazz. This is 1967, 66, 67. I graduated in 65. And I was so disappointed. I thought, God, not one university has a scholarship for me. You know, this is terrible. And it so happened that my neighbor, who was a stewardess, had said, oh, can you drop me to Churchgate? I used to live in the suburbs. And so I took her in my car. I loved being with her because she always smelled so good and she had these beautiful underwears and, you know, from her trips. So, so I took her to Churchgate. And as we entered, the general manager came up to me and said, oh my God, why don't girls like you come for the interview? We've gone through 500 girls. We're only looking for 2 girls. We haven't even found one. But you speak Hindi, you speak Marathi, Gujarati, blah, 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 and English. And he said, would you like to fly for us? And I thought, it'll be impossible. My parents will say no because it's considered like, you know, being a waitress in the air. Of course, I turned it around. I called it sophisticated hitchhiking, you know. So I said, so when I got it, so I said, well, I really won't be able to do it because meanwhile, of course, my parents have told me, if you're not going for the arranged marriage, we will sit for your master's and then we'll send you for your doctorate to America because that's where you want to go. This was there, which would take another 4 years before I got there, right? So I thought, well, and then he said the magic words to me. He said, we'll get your passport for you in 2 weeks, and then you go to London for 2 months of training. I almost fell on the floor. I said, yes, okay, I'm doing it. So because in those days, for you, for those of you who are very young, you have it very easy now if you want to go out. There's also such a phenomena as the Indian tourist. But when I was young, there was no such category as an Indian tourist because the Indian rupee was not convertible. And so I'm talking about the 60s, and soon after, you know, we had independence and stuff. So you couldn't take money out, number one. So no country wanted you. You couldn't get a visa. You had to get a P form, a permission to leave. Only then would you get a passport. And so there were all these restraints put on us. So when he said, 2 weeks passport, the magic word, I said, I'm in. So that's how I got in, but it was a means to an end for me. And I made it very clear when I was, you know, then I had to meet the British part of British Airways, the general manager, and she was right there. And she said, why would you like to be a stewardess? And I said, it's not really that I want to be a stewardess, but I like the idea of the juxtaposition of time and space and cultures. And this is one way I'll be able to learn about it. And that was what got me, you know, I was in anyway. I mean, they'd already taken me in, but so that was it. So I got out.
So you got out, flying.
For exactly 1 year. I got out for 1 year exactly.
Excellent.
And I mean, I traveled for 1 year as a steward, 2 months training and another 10 months flying, which was wonderful experience. But at the end of the 10 months, I gave in my resignation. And before giving, and there was a reason I did that, of course. In the interim, while I was flying, Martha Graham had come here to do a show, and I was so disappointed that there was no university that was giving me a scholarship. Berkeley, by the way, started a jazz department around that time, 69 or 67, but they had no scholarships. That when I met Martha Graham, I went backstage and I said, could I? Because I'd studied Indian classical dance. And I said, look, I'm looking for a scholarship and I haven't found one for jazz music. But since you do jazz, modern dance, and I've studied Bharatanatyam and Odissi and blah, 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 and I'd like to do the same thing and combine movement. Could I do that? She said, yes, but now there was a stumbling block. She said, oh, you can, but you have to come and audition for me. The same old thing, come there. So it was like a catch-22. And I said, oh my God, how am I going to get there? So the stewardess thing worked fine. I worked, and then I went there. A year later, I auditioned, and that's how I got my scholarship and my visa.
So it was a flow.
And I went.
You had to get out, and you found by any means possible and made it out.
Mm-hmm.
And in New York, when you did the audition and got into the Martha Graham Academy, did you have an idea that dance is what you were going to pursue, or was it again a means to an end?
No, it was a means to an end.
So your
music. It was
music
music.
was
It was
still
always music. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in New York, what happened?
But no, in the interim, I must tell you what happened.
Yeah.
Now I'm traveling, and it's before you leave, they're always kind enough to say, you can have a trip wherever you like. Yeah. So now they've given me this opportunity to choose. Most stewardesses would choose Beirut or Singapore, because that's where all the good shopping was done. Beirut was the Riviera of the Middle East. And I said, okay, I will choose Singapore. And so you get 10 days. So it was cutting it very close to the day that I was retiring from BOAC. In those days, it was called BOAC. So anyway.
So you chose Singapore.
Singapore. Now, this is where the planets come in. I'm there. My last trip, I walk into the hotel where all the British Airways stewardesses and staff was put up. And there's a note for me there. And it says, and it's from a woman, and it was to be held till, and then my name on it, right? And it said, EMI Records. Please call Daisy Devon. She was the head of EMI in Singapore. But now I don't know who this woman is. So meanwhile, now I'm told, one of the musicians that I'd met here in the jazz group called Balsi Balsara had moved then, and he called me up. He said, oh, Asha, you're in the new Asia magazine. They'd done a magazine, Asia, of 5. Don't ask me why I was in it, because I really didn't think I deserve to be in it. But it was 5 beautiful women of India, photographs by a very well-known photographer, Kishore Parekh. He called me, he said, you're in Asia magazine. Oh, I said, oh, I'll come and get the copy of it. Why not? So this is like 2 days before my flight to return back. And then I retire, right, from the airlines and get ready for America. So I said, oh, okay, so I'll come. So as I'm going, the stars. So for every bad thing that happens to you, there's a good thing that happens. So I go there to pick up the magazine, and I get hit by motorbike. And I'm limping out. I get the magazine, and many other things that happened, which are amazing. I mean, I won't go into the details because already I talk too much. So
we'll get you back there. But in Singapore, we want to hear the Singapore story.
Yeah. So now I'm there with the limp. I go to the British Airways. He says, oh, no, you can't take this flight. You've got to, we have to pull you off the flight. We're going to call in another girl to take the flight. Now, you remember that note that's there, Daisy Devon. Yeah. So all this time, I haven't been able to, call her, because I said, what's the point? I'm going. Whoever she is, it doesn't matter. Now I have time. So I call her. And Daisy Devon says, we want to put you in. Now I see the connection. The connection is that in that magazine, they put my name down as stewardess for British Airways who sings and blah, blah, blah. And, so that was the reason. And then I went to see Daisy Devon. She put me into the studio. Now I'm supposed to fly the next day with a group called the Surfers. The album is called Angel of the Morning. We sing these 4 songs. It's an EP. And then I'm deported. The people come to the, they come to the thing because I didn't take my flight because they told me, oh, you're going as a passenger, so we'll get, the other girl will operate.
So you recorded in Singapore and they escorted you back out.
Yeah.
And that's
The next
become
day, the next
yeah,
day.
that was one of the first tracks I heard as well. But I want to play something else now that's very descriptive of what Sunil Kothari and some others have spoken of when they've been writing about you, is that you can sing like an angel, but you've got like some devilish stuff going on within you as well.
Really?
Yeah. So after the Singapore episode, you've come back, you've gone to New York, done the Martha Graham Scholarship. And in New York, you have also hit the ground running.
Hit the ground running.
Started recording and sending out your music to whoever was willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I know there's a story that John Hammond, who was the head of the Columbia Records at the time.
He was actually in an honorary position at the time because he was as old as I am today at that time, and
So
in
you
the
were
70s. But he had discovered many famous people like Billie Holiday, Bessie Smith. So his career went back to the 30s and 40s. Bruce Springsteen later, Bob Dylan. I was like one of the last ones he discovered, so to speak. But yes, 6 months, my initial because I only had a year's visa for the dance thing. So I knew I had to quickly as you said, hit the floor and run. I started sending out this little tiny tape that I'd made. In those days, it was small reel-to-reels. And it was done with, it was a third stream kind of music, what I was experimenting with, which was Indian classical and jazz. And I kept sending that to the only name I knew, which was John Hammond. And this is why I keep talking about the planets being in conjunction and that there is a higher power that guides us.
So you had this music you were sending into John Hammond.
Yeah.
With the intent that he would hear your music and call you in and discover you.
And nobody called. 6 months had gone by and I was still dancing away. And then I got a call from Ved Mehta. He's a marvelous writer who wrote a book called Portrait of India. And in that, there's one chapter called Jazz in Bombay. Yeah. That chapter had initially come out in the New Yorker, for whom he worked. And later, now it's in its like, I think 58th printing, that book. At Yale, they teach it in universities, at Yale University, and everybody, it's a Yale University press print. And it so happened that John Hammond was sitting at the Century Club, which used to be a men-only, how things have changed, club at that time. And Ved happened to walk in, and Ved at the time probably was the only Indian, and he's also blind, so easy to spot. So when Ved walked in, John went up to him and said, Mr. Mehta, I'm reading your book and I'm fascinated by the girl you've written about. That's how it, now, this is all to do with the stars, destiny. So Ved calls me up, he says, now, of all the people, the one person I'm sending the tapes to, Ved has no idea that I'm there sending tapes to this guy. Ved calls me and says, Asha, please call this man. His name is John Hammond, and he's with CBS, and he wants to meet you. Now, isn't that amazing? Right? So that's it. So I called him, and the secretary, who every time I called, I still remember her name was Elizabeth. And every time I called and I'd say, did you get my tape? And I was so polite. I even asked her, what's your name? Just to be friendly with her and suck up to her a little bit so she'd give the damn tape to him, you know. And she'd say, oh, I will give it to him. He's very busy now. We'll call you back. And it never happened. 6 months have rolled by. Nobody's called me. Now I get the appointment. I call him directly. I don't even go through it. It's direct, right? I've got the number. And he invites me, and I go. And when I walked in, I literally almost pulled my hand back. I was going to say, na, 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 because I was so upset with her. I mean, really, I was so furious with this. No, the na, 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 na came later because I won an award for that record. So then that's it. So then he called, I met him, and he was an old man. I hope I don't do what he did to me, which was no, nothing like that. No, nothing like that. No, no.
I was like, are you sure we
No,
can
no,
do
no,
this here?
no, no, nothing like that.
Okay.
No, no.
Okay.
So I play my tape of Indian classical and jazz, and here's this old man. It's taken me years to get to this point, right? And he hears me and he clutches his chest and he goes, and I think, oh shit, now he's going to die on me. After all this, I've gone through all this, and now he's going to, oh no, not now, please, not now, please, not now. And he goes, and then he goes, marvelous, marvelous. That's it. That's so. So of course, the next thing he said, oh, we'd like to record you. Will you come to the studio next Thursday? Now, meanwhile, I'm sort of saying, oh my goodness, I better explain to him that I'm here on a scholarship and I don't want to be deported again. I say, Mr. Hammond, I have to ask Martha Graham because I'm here on a scholarship. He doesn't get the message. Now I'm thinking in my head, oh God, I must be one of the many pebbles on the beach. He's not going to stick his neck out for me. No way, you know. So I said, this is something I have to deal with myself. And I said, that's okay, Mr. Hammond. I'll see you next Thursday. I will take the permission from her and come. That's it.
And then John Hammond. So John Hammond discovered you through Ved Mehta and Jazz in Bombay.
The book, yeah.
Yeah.
A simple book. That's how you get discovered. A laugh, a book. That's how I've been discovered.
Yes. Yes. And so he brought you into the fold in what was the peripheral edges of a very centrifugal New York music scene.
Later,
because
yes.
he's the one who took you onto Ornette Coleman.
He didn't take me there.
Okay. How did it happen?
There was a lot of opposition.
So he said he needs you here next week to come in and record.
So I
and
had
you
10
did.
days. It was a Monday. He said, not this Thursday, but next Thursday. To do he called it Asha's thing, the one that gave him the heart attack. You know, that one, right? The Indian classical and jazz. So now I have to deal with things myself. And I'm still saying, God, you've done all this. You've opened all these doors for me. Every door has opened, you know, as I mentioned. That's why I told you the whole background, the flying, the this, the that, the coming, Okay. Now, I've taken the day off from Martha Graham. And as I'm walking, for those of you who've been in New York, it's 53rd Street and 52nd Street. Between that is the big Black Rock. It's an Erno Saarinen building. It was called the Black Rock. Is the CBS building. On 53rd Street, on that, between 5th and 6th, is the Museum of Modern Art. So I walk out and I see a big flag, Klaus Oldenburg. I'd never heard the name before. And I'm saying, oh, well, I've got the day off now. I better educate myself. Who is this man, Klaus Oldenburg? So I'm about to walk in. And I see this very elegant man, so elegant and so proper, clean and neat, like it jumped out of a page of a book, right? And he's opening the door for me and he says, and meanwhile, I've just said in my head, God, you've done all this for me. Now you have to help me out. Something has to happen, you know. So the man, he opens the door and he says, may I help you? Not that I thought he was God, no. He opened the door. He said, may I help you? So I said, if you really want to help me, you may have to marry me. So he looked at me and he said, gosh, you won't believe it. I've been watching you come from 6th Avenue this way, and I kept wishing you were going to come here. I've never seen anyone dressed like you. By the way, I was dressed in a pillowcase. It was an Indian, you know, those Piraji Sagra used to make these big, huge bolsters with that abla work and, you know, that mirror work and all that. So I'd cut the end of the pillow because I was too poor as a student to buy these fancy clothes. And I'd pulled myself in the pillow. And I was skinny, so I could get into a pillow. And so, but he loved it. And I had a Saurashtra, you know, the men wear that Saurashtra thing. So it was different. Nobody used to dress like that then.
You were
No, so we got married. And he's still, by the way, I consider my family there. And I just left my puppy with him. He's babysitting the puppy while I'm here.
So
Yeah.
you went on and got married. You recorded with John Hammond. How did it lead to Ornette Coleman?
Yeah. So John Hammond does this esoteric Indian classical and jazz, which obviously is not a commercial thing at all. No one's going to buy it, right? He calls a man called Clive Davis, who at that time had just started. Today, he's a huge name in the music industry. He had just started as president. There's always corporate hierarchy in these big music corporations, and there's always this, these machinations that go on and politics that go on, like any big corporation. John being more revered, and he was like the Magellan of jazz. Everybody honored him, the venerable John Hammond. So when John called him, he's coming down. The president is coming to a man in an honorary position, believe me. So already he hates me before he's even seen me or heard me, I'm sure. Coming from the wrong door. So he plays this Asha's thing to him, and I'm sitting there, and he said, "This is jazz. It won't sell."
Again, how did you get
So,
to
yeah.
Ornette Coleman?
So now at this point,
Yeah.
why he did not physically take me or introduce me to him is because of this.
Okay.
Clive apparently wanted Genya Ravan, a singer who was then with a group called 10 Wheel Drive, to sing this with Ornette. He had already tried different singers, many major singers, and not been happy with it. It was the first time Ornette Coleman was using a vocalist, because his music, for those of you who know his music, he's the father of freeform jazz, of totally different kind of jazz, and he started his own form of music called harmolodics. So John just said to me, "Go into the studio. I've told the producer of the album that I'm sending somebody to sing, to try out." Again, as luck would have it, because it's such an extraordinary session where first time he's using a vocal thing, a voice. The people from Rolling Stone were there, Downbeat, they were all backstage, like behind the engineers thing. So I didn't know they were there. I was totally oblivious to this. All I'm doing is going there to try to see if anything will come out of this. And this is all free-form jazz, but it's all very improvised. It's right then and there. It's all done in one take. It's not like when you do pop music, we stop, we punch in, we can edit it, we can do all kinds of things, but not with that jazz music. It has to be straight on. Everybody's playing. And the one thing I learned from working with Ornette is democracy in music, especially in that kind of music. Because when you play that kind of jazz, you are holding your own strength and your own creativity in your own pocket. But still you're sharing and you're blending with everyone else. You have to be so cohesive with everybody. So anyway, coming back to this, that's what happened. I went in, I tried it. He loved it. They heard it backstage. They couldn't believe it. So I got rave, rave, rave. After that, when they wrote about it, I got rave, rave, rave reviews. And then on the strength of those 2 tracks, that's it. Only 2 tracks that I sang in 1971. I got nominated for like a jazz vocalist, the best jazz vocals of 1972 in the polls. And much to my surprise, I was in a tie-in with somebody absolutely my idol, Ella Fitzgerald. So there was in one breath like Asha Puthli, Dee Dee Bridgewater, and Ella Fitzgerald. And that was
So a magical trajectory,
magical.
like this deportation in Singapore. You've recorded there. You got to New York. Martha Graham, John Hammond. You're recording with Ornette Coleman. And for those of you who may not know, the album was called Science Fiction, and it's now legendary. It's like a mark point in the history of music that this album came about.
That's right.
With Ornette Coleman himself, like you said, took a complete radical break from what had been jazz's trajectory up till then.
His jazz,
and here comes what then became known as the disco mystic from India.
Yeah.
Later on, you were referred to as the disco mystic from India.
Yes.
But this inkling had begun because you came with your classical training and your 4 octave vocal range with this artist who's breaking from the past,
Yeah.
and you guys put together and made something, like I said, is now an epoch, a marker in music history with science fiction.
Yes, it
Yes?
is. It is. On it himself. I mean, it's like he's an icon. you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
In jazz.
In jazz.
And it set a benchmark for what then happened afterwards.
Right.
So the question I was going to ask you is, do you think again, the training in classical Hindustani laid a foundation for this, in that jazz can take from classical Hindustani, that it's not matching music, as it
No,
were.
no.
And classical Hindustani also follows the tals, and the surs are also, it's not a matching, it's not a melodic trajectory. You have to work with the other musician again on instinct,
No, it's different
right?
though. But it's different. You do have a format. You do have certain scales in the raga that you go on. It's much more disciplined in that sense.
Right.
This is literally haywire. I mean, you can see it's haywire. It's like, and you've got to make sense out of it. It's like, I think if somebody, I don't know, perhaps let's say someone has autism or Asperger or something like that, one of these mental illnesses, right? And the thoughts come tumbling in, boom, 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 boom. They're all tumbling in, and you don't know how to make sense of it. That's what it's like with this music. It's like you've got to be very quick and go, there's a hole. Let's put it in there quick, and let's hit that note quick. Don't miss it. So it's like that almost. I don't know how to describe it.
So how much of a break from the past was science fiction? Why is it considered a classic? Why do we look at science fiction as a benchmark in
the jazz industry?
Yeah.
Well, they consider it a benchmark. The jazz critics do, because it was the first time Ornette, as I mentioned, had used voice.
Okay. And also in the way that the compositions were approached, it was completely something new.
Yes,
and there you were,
totally,
right at the epoch of it, doing something.
Yeah, I was very fortunate and blessed that I got this opportunity.
And then Coleman is credited with inventing you as a future disco icon.
I don't know why
something
that man.
else
I have no idea where it's coming from, but I don't know. People write things sometimes when to me. I mean, that's what they see it as.
So if I can read you a quick quote, this is what comes from David Keenan's very expansive essay for RBMA as well.
Mhm.
And one of the quotes says, "Disco was the right vehicle for her combination of classical Indian modulation, sci-fi sex kitten eroticism, and Kate Bush-esque performance style. She took Coleman science fiction out into the wild." This is what has been written of what you did with Ornette Coleman, and then the work that you did since. So there seems like there was a key that was unlocked.
Yeah, I think what happened was my sensibilities, not necessarily just Indian music, my sensibilities of pop music played heavily, because I remember Village Voice writing, Gary Giddens, again, very respected critic, writing that it is pop music of the future. That's what he wrote. So it's possible that David Keenan has read that article, and therefore this analysis that he's given.
A future disco icon.
Yeah,
but it's something
I
that's
think
occurred
so.
across many mediums.
Yes.
Where they say science fiction was the point at
turning
which you
point.
departed
Yeah.
into becoming who you became, which was a disco icon.
Well,
You don't agree?
no.
How would you defer your history then? How
My
would you
history-
say what happened there?
My history is artists keep reinventing themselves. The minute you have a success in any one form, most people want to stick to it. They do a certain kind of music and they say, "Oh, we've got a big hit now. Let's stick with R&B or let's stick with jazz, or let's stick with whatever genre. And in those days, they used to put people in pockets. You had to have a genre of music. When I recorded this initially, it's now in the jazz, avant garde jazz box. Now you're stuck. Once you're in that box, forget it. It's not like this black box, it's even tighter, you know, smaller. You cannot get out of it because most record labels will say, oh, it's not commercial. We don't want to lose our money. You know, we're not investing. Nobody wants to sign a solo avant garde jazz artist. So, from India. At this point, yeah, it's understood. I'm from India. Yeah.
Nobody wanted to
Nobody.
sign someone who fit that kind of description,
yes.
but yet you took it.
No, I was talking about artists and how we are always a real artist. I'm talking about. There are some artists who want to play it very safe and they'll stick to. They have a success, they'll stay with it. They will not venture out of that area. My career has been, if you look at the trajectory of my career, it's always been a different genre. Jazz, fine. Nobody in America wanted to sign me. And I mean, nobody except John Hammond, who saw me as something unique and called the Washington Post and said, I've found a genius. But that is John Hammond, who was one in a million. The rest of the millions didn't want me. You know, so
Knew at the time and what was happening.
So to get a solo album deal, actually, as a singer, and then I went to, and also remember when I'm new to America. I'd never heard R&B really. I hadn't heard a lot of the other black stuff that was going on, so I really got turned on to all the R&B singers, and I liked it. And I said, "Oh, that's the kind of music I'd love to do." So, and as a creative person, your passions keep changing. You know, your you want to experiment with other forms of music. Yeah.
And you had no reason to play it safe.
No.
It was all so new. You could literally go
Choose
anywhere
anything.
with it.
Right.
So your music, after this episode in New York and this time with Martha Graham and the recordings you did, seemed to get a better reception in Europe. You couldn't find anyone to sign you in the US. And then what happened? What was the next phase? Because what we were looking at is
because
that
what happened was they all thought of me as a serious jazz artist, so they didn't want to sign me. You know, they said, no, it's not commercial.
Right.
What happened was, well, first of all, even though I make all these funny faces when I hear these pop, believe me, at the time I enjoy doing it. Because remember, I'm young, I'm in my 20s, I'm not, you know, I'm like experimenting, I'm trying, so it's okay. But now in retrospect, I say, oh God, did I really do that? You know? Sorry, your question was.
No worries. So this was the beginning of what we were looking at, early 70s, into somewhat of a futurism with music, with commercial, with media as a whole, advertising, film. There was a certain futurism that began being looked at.
Yeah.
We were coming out of the the civil rights movements and everything that was happening in the US. Everybody was looking towards the future, even with music. And enter what we call a little bit of disco mysticism. And like I said to you before, you've been called that before, the disco mystic from India. So disco mysticism was a look with disco as the first electronic genre that actually looked to elevate beyond the human experience. And taking this back to this mythology of the Gandharvas, where the artist in India is the divine, is the medium to the divine for mortals. So when we come into this phase that we're talking about, disco mysticism, you've been with Ornette Coleman, you've set your benchmark there as well. Again, what is it that we're exploring? Where were you going with the music then? So you said you were young, you were also just having fun looking at stuff. Where was that exploration going?
Ideally, what I did really want to explore, now I'm going to go into areas which you all might consider me crazy. So I'm not sure if I want to talk about it. And it's, well, in a way, I guess it's to do with music. I had an out-of-body experience. No, you see.
I believe it. I totally believe it.
Anyway, let's not go there.
No, go there fully.
No,
Because you
no.
do with your art, you do
But
with your music.
But anyway, I realized that what I wanted to do was make functional music. Now, that is what I love about Indian music, but I've not really pursued in that direction. And neither have I pursued in another direction, which I will not talk about. But, but it's to do with spirituality.
Yes.
Maybe the time wasn't right. I was young. I wanted to experiment different kinds of music. Your question.
What were you exploring that then led you
Mm.
into this realm that became known as disco, which was
Well,
electronic music, experimenting with electronic as a first genre, disco as a first electronic genre?
yeah. Well, first of all, I called myself a space cadet. Okay. That could be one because that's why I mentioned the outer body experience and certain other experiences which made me feel that there has to be a function to music where you can maybe use it as a healing process, maybe use it for defense, maybe. Now in Indian classical music there are such things like when we hear stories about Tansen breaking glass with his voice, right? There's a erudite man sitting there in our audience, a doctor of music, and so many other things that music can do, from healing, not just entertain, but that's also a form of healing. um,
Well, like the classical rags here,
mhm.
when there are certain times they are to be sung. There are
Right,
certain seasons in
exactly,
which you sing them
exactly,
because
certain
each
notes
has a
which
different
uh-huh,
effect
uh-huh.
on the body, on the
Yeah,
system, and what it's meant to do for you.
exactly.
So I'm trying to lay a premise which says that the fact that you became a disco icon in the 70s is not that far removed from the fact that you had trained in India, been brought up in a
No,
culture that
yes,
looked as the kala
but that
as a
connection has not yet happened
right, right.
because people see only the peripheral. They only see the outer casings. They don't see what's deeper. Sometimes I'm talking about people who are in the music industry, who are merchandising and marketing. They don't see the deeper thing. But that is the connection. That's why I mentioned earlier about Ornette and yoga and, things like that. But um, yes, it led to disco eventually, and on a everyday, not on a deeper issue, but on a very superficial issue level. I went to London to do a television show, and the television show came about again by some quirk of fate, I guess. I'd done a movie which was running at the Curzon, and the team that I did it with wanted to send another actor called um, Sam Waterston, who's in the movie, who's now very famous for Law and Order, and very fine actor. Well, I'm not a fine actor, but anyway, he was a really good actor. And it was called the Russell Harty Plus, the show. And they said, look, we want one of your actors to come, but you have to pay the airfare and we'll pay for the hotel. And the team said, absolutely no, no way. We're a small indie film company. We cannot afford to pay. So a few weeks went by, and suddenly, this is when I just won the Downbeat Award. And they heard that I'm in the movie and I won the Downbeat. So they said, you know what? After the movie stops running, because we're not going to help them push that movie at all, we are going to bring this singer down to sing for us, and we'll show the clips of the movie after it's finished its run. I mean, they were getting back at them. That's how I got my first TV show, which was a one on one. And it really, to this day, is probably one of the best television interviews I've had, because it was like quick banter. It was very fast. It was quick. It was funny. And I sang a jazz song which sounded very pop. The next morning, I got five. Literally, when you talk about making it overnight, this is called making it overnight. That turning point. That was the turning point. And it was not because, in a way, obliquely, it was because of Ornette's winning the downbeat. But that's not what I was singing. It was not accessible music. I was singing something very accessible. I sang a song, an old jazz pop standard, which Streisand had also recorded, called My Man. Oh, my man, I love him so. That one. But I did it very pop. The next day, I had EMI, Polygram, CBS, everyone bidding. It was like a bidding war. And London Times called, oh, we want a double spread with David Bailey taking the pictures. So literally overnight, I got, with very little effort, I got a record deal.
So
And
did you know that moment was the moment that did you know in that moment as it was happening, like this is it? This is it for me after
I
everything?
thought it was it, but it ended up not being it. But yeah, but because I thought it was it because initially they said, "Oh, we want a 5-year deal, escalating royalties, escalating percentages. Oh, even the Beatles don't ask for that much, percentage royalties, right?" But then they said, "Oh, the Beatles get that much." It was 14%, in case you want to know what the Beatles got at the time, and we're willing to go up to 14%. And so this was, all this stuff going on. So, uh, yes, we had a 5-year deal. So that was my first contract, a deal. But the reason my albums changed in their in their genre, so to speak, or in their complexion, I was going to say, is because this was London CBS that signed me. When London CBS signed me, that record became a hit in Germany. But sometimes, again, you might have good luck, and then there are times when the stars go against you. And now this is 1973, 74, when the whole Idi Amin influx of Asians comes into place. A lot of Asians are coming into Britain. The work permit issue became a big thing. Like, wait, again, you see, that's the trouble with any young Indian artist. Now, I don't know, things have changed, but when a person from another country wants to go to a foreign place and do their music there, you have all these socio-political, geopolitical events that shape your life, that change your life, that obstruct your ambition constantly. So it's even more challenging for, let's say, a young Indian who might want to go abroad. They have to have all these bases covered. Of course, at that time, it was a different world. I mean, so I hope there's never another Idi Amin, so it won't happen. But um, John Denver and I had done a show, TV show, called Rolf Harris Plus. Now, I'd been signed to CBS. CBS had presumed that I'm British because there were a lot of Indians living in Britain at the time who spoke like I do. So they just presumed, oh, she's British. They never took a work permit, nothing. They just signed me to this 5-year deal. We did the Rolf Harris, the same thing. And this is when we got into trouble. Suddenly, the Home Office sent a letter to John Denver's manager and to CBS and said, your artist is not allowed to work in Britain. You'll have broken the rules. So even though I didn't get deported like before, this time it's something else. So CBS now is sort of in a quandary. Oh my God, what are we going to do now? We've got this artist escalating royalties, escalating advances. What the hell? How are we going to get out of this one? Now they were lucky that I got pregnant. And I was even luckier that I got pregnant because I have the most adorable son who's here today. And anyway, so I was so thrilled. I went to tell the Dick Asher, the president of CBS London. I said, I'm pregnant. He must have thought this is manna from heaven. At this point, they haven't told me about the Home Office letter. So he said, first his reaction was, oh my God, what have you done? Are you ready to ruin your life? And all this, He didn't know. It's the lawyers, those, lawyers that are up to mischief. Yeah. So then they must have told him. So now they had a loophole because in those days, this is pre-women's rights to work during maternity. In 1977, there was legislation made when a woman, so there are all these things, not just being an Indian, but being a woman and in the music business, since I know I'm addressing a lot of women in the music business. I don't know what the rules are here. I'm presuming they're the same as in the States now, where you're given maternity leave. But at that time in 1974, there was no maternity leave. So they had ground to stand on. They had a loophole to get me out of giving me escalating royalties, escalating things. But now they could tell the Home Office, okay, we're not working, we're sending her back. And that's how the second album took 3 countries to complete, a year and a half while I'm suspended. And I always tell everyone, my son and 3 producers, right? That album took 3 producers, 3 countries, year and a half, and it was shelved at the end of it because I was suspended. Because if they picked up the contract, they would have had to pay me. So it was a catch again, another thing. So my son only took 1 producer and 7.5 months. Yeah, I was telling everyone. So anyway, that that's what happened.
So, so to give everybody a little bit of a background here, I've said this a couple of times that you've been called the disco mystic and the woman who fell to earth. In 2009, the Gunhilly British Satellite Earth Station transmitted a track, one of your most epic
Space
tracks,
talk.
into deep space to mark the 50th year anniversary of the moon landing. And from science,
40th.
was it the 40th year or
Mhm.
the 50th year?
That was the 40th.
Damn, my whole installation was incorrect then. I said 50th year of moon landing. So, from science fiction onwards, your work references, again, we're coming back to this, the extraterrestrial outer space persona, akin to George Clinton's Parliament and Mothership connection, and stuff that Erica
There
Badu
was a
also
lot
looks
of
to in
that.
her work.
But that's
But
later.
that was much,
Much
later. There was
later.
nobody doing
Yeah,
this
it's later. All
except
that is
you.
later.
So I'm going to read another quote here, which speaks about your work. Again, quote, Puthli, under the spell of Coleman's break with the past, minted a form of free-floating, ultra-sexualized intergalactic disco that matched hyperventilating time with erotic electronics and surreal sonic environments. Puthli has gone so far out that she has spacewalked into inner space, wandering on the floor of the amniotic ocean inside the time of the body itself. These are ragas for the cities of the red night, pure body music, no longer for the stations of the sun and the stars. Reality in the world of Asha Puthli, in the music of Ornette Coleman, and what happened thereafter is for people who can't handle disco's fictions. This was to give you an indication
Yeah.
of, the music is impactful. You're being studied in universities.
Yeah,
I
that's
found
true.
out about
That's
you through a
true.
university
That's
course.
true. That's
So-
true. They do. I don't know what they're studying. They're all going to, there's not much to study.
Well, it's like they
I'm
said.
an open book.
It's like they said that you have gone so
Yeah.
far out
Yeah.
that you've spacewalked out of anything known.
Well,
We're looking at a Western milieu.
he knows I'm an alien. It's as simple as that. I'm an alien.
Do you believe that? Do
Oh,
you
yeah.
really think that? That's what
Oh,
Gandharvas
yeah.
are, right?
Oh, yeah. I believe I'm an alien. But anyway, I was going to tell you about what he has written. I'm like, when you read it, I realized why he's saying it. Space Talk was done, that whole beat and that feeling which was done, and that whole pre that album, 1973, the soft quality of the voice, that comes from Indian music, by the way, that high, soft. Because I remember Pandit Ji used to teach me, the Jaipur Gharana style is very closed. It's not an open khulla gala, kind of singing. It's a little bit more subdued voice. And I remember when I was studying, I mentioned earlier my early training, Hyacinth Brown opera. And there are 2 very different techniques of singing. One is from here, the Jaipur Gharana. While opera always comes from the back and it goes in and you're projecting a sound into your head. And it's a whole different thing, but you have to project out. I won't do it now because I don't want to break the mic and I don't want to, but it's loud. That's why they don't use mics in opera, because it's like now they do maybe. But I remember my teacher, Hyacinth Brown, telling me, I want you could be such a great opera singer, but you have to stop singing Indian classical. The minute she said, I have to stop singing something which meant, again, another restraint, I said, you know what? My Panditji never tells me to stop singing opera, right? I'm going to stop learning opera. I said, because if it's restrictive, I'm not going to do opera. And that's, but coming back to why the softness, the soft caliber of the voice, I think it comes from that initial soft approach. Coming back to what you were saying about going into disco music, okay, when the first album 73 album came out in Germany, as I mentioned, because I wasn't allowed to now work in England, they were now sending me off to Germany. And again, like they had compared me to the Beatles with the uh, royalties, they now were saying, oh, but the Beatles too went to Hamburg to, to get disco. I mean, okay, all right, I'll do it, I'll go. So I went to Germany, and those albums had all that soft quality of singing, including Devil is Loose. A lot of people say that this album and the other album are templates that later on Donna Summer, Pete Bellotte, Giorgio Moroder all ripped off from my sound. Now, remember, I've mentioned to you that I was suspended because I was pregnant. So at that time was when they jumped on the bandwagon. Apparently, this is, I'm told, by people in Germany in the industry. Because when they called me up, they said, we want to work with the real McCoy. You know? And the dress I wore, she had come backstage and asked me where I got the dress. And I'd said, oh, it's Bill Gibb from London. He designed it for me. That dress is an iconic dress. It's in many books. It's in the Mick Rock glitter book. It's in Glam and Glitter. I forget all the names, but David Bowie did the forward. It's in many, many books, this particular dress. But it's with the gown on top, so you don't see what's inside. But she had seen me in the television show. I'd worn it without the thing and with it, with the gown top. She'd come back and ask me where I got it. The minute I was suspended, my friend Bill Gibb, who designed that, called me up. He said, there's a young singer from Germany who came here and she wanted the same dress you wanted. And I told Asha that you're my good friend. I would never do that to you. I would never design for her. I've told her to go and buy it off the rack at Harrods. So,
I mean, to be sure, this is
So she
Donna
did.
Summer we're talking about. We're talking about
she
Donna
did.
Summer and Giorgio Moroder.
Yes, and she did go and buy it off the rack, because when you see the first cover of Love to Love You, Love to Love
Yeah.
You, Baby,
Yeah.
which according to them, was inspired by I Dig Love,
Yes.
which means the same, I love to
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Except, right? But it was a style. So what happened was, suddenly a woman who was belting out songs
Yes.
suddenly is singing this soft thing, this what is known as, according to this man, the slinky, sensual, intergalactic
spaced out disco.
sound. Yeah,
Yeah.
spaced out disco sound. Yeah.
Yeah. I
That's what
mean, I've
happened.
seen the pre-exposure to you Donna Summer footage as well as audio, and then I've seen the post-exposure to you, and yeah, there's no doubt
So
the
it's-
costume, the way of performance, even the pose, the way you performed on the
way I used
German
to
television
move.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that happened.
Yeah.
So that is why they say it's a precursor to the Munich sound.
Yeah.
Because that came to be known as the Munich sound in disco.
Right.
So that was the precursor.
Yeah, and Germany's been the lead in electronic
In
music
electronic for a
from
long time,
then
with
on
Kraftwerk
and
and even
onwards.
before, yeah.
So
They've been ahead.
so I'm actually going to go in here to say that you were globalizing before the word even existed, because you were recording in Germany, you were shooting in Italy, you were signed to a European label, but doing work in America. So there was definitely a globalization occurring before we even knew what the word meant.
Right. I think before even MP3s, the internet, none of that had started yet. This one is done, it was recorded in 77, 78. And according to NYU, Dr. Jason King, who started the Clive Davis, ironically, the Clive Davis Department of Music, was one of the people. And he mentioned, he said, you were like one of the first artists of globalization who did globalization, because that album you just heard, that track from that album, was for an Italian company. That's why you see the Strix, done by a Belgian producer called Jean Lou, who you may have heard of. He did Born to Be Alive. Born to. Okay. In
A
fact, there's a
disco classic.
yeah, and there's a documentary coming out on him. I'm in the documentary. It's coming out actually this month or next month in France and Belgium. It's coming out as a movie, which is an aside. But coming back to this, it was so he was Belgian, Italian label. The tracks were done in France. I was recording in Philadelphia at Sigma Sound with the sweethearts of Sigma. They're called the backup vocals. And so that was the first kind of globalized recording. It didn't take just, yes, the Rolling Stones would go to Jamaica and record, but then they were one British group going to Jamaica, the whole thing, but not where it was going. Tracks were going here, and different people from different countries were involved. So he calls this one of the first premier albums in that area of globalization. That
So,
album.
so we can say you were one of the first of what we now call a crossover artist, right?
Yes,
You
yes.
were one of the first
That
of pioneering before we knew the
crossover.
concept existed. Um, More what you were is an artist who very easily incorporated what was the swinging 70s in the West. And with being the only young Indian woman, a Bombay girl out on the international platform at a time when there was nobody else except Freddie Mercury.
Yes,
Yeah?
that's right.
Queen was the only, I mean, he was
He
the
was
only person who was from
actually-
India, Bombay.
Yeah, but
at that
he was number one. He was there a little earlier because he left, I think, in '67. I think I could be wrong, and he sort of was 15 or 16 when he went to school there. So he was much more anglicized than I was. I was really steeped in Indian culture in the sense that I studied Indian classical dance, I studied Indian classical music. He was not that Indian, and he didn't see himself as Indian. He saw himself as a Persian. He always said that in the press, and nobody knew he was Indian till after his death almost. Now there's a movie, of course, coming out. I don't know how that pans out, but um, I was going to tell you something and I forgot. Oh, yeah. But being Indian.
Yeah.
We did a train tour long ago in 1969, I think it was. And Freddie Mercury was with a group called Slash or Stash. And he was in the, I was with Bernie Taupin, who wrote music with Elton John. We were going to do a show called John Peel Show. And I was doing a thing on dance, not music. This is when I'd just gone, with the airlines, and we used to get days there. And it was so I did this whole thing of iconography and mythology through Indian mudras, through the hand gestures. So I wasn't going there as a singer, but when I saw a young Parsi man, I sort of went up and said, "Oh, you're Indian," and I'm dressed in my Indian clothes, Indian dance costume, He said, "No, I'm Persian." He probably got so scared. I'm going to sort of, try. And but also remember, Queen had the umbrella. Number one, a boys band group, which was on top of the rung in the hierarchy of music in the 70s. Rock and roll bands were number one. They were the first ones to get signed. Then the solo male artist. Then the 3-part female, singers, like 3 Degrees, Supremes. And the solo female singer was really at the bottom of the rung, always. It was like that was the preference of signing artists. So comparatively, I think Freddie, he's an amazing musician, brilliant, 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 just amazing. They had it a little easier because they had the umbrella of the group. he was not, and he was right. He changed his name from Faridun Balsara to Freddie Mercury, which was very good. It was a good thing he did. Um, Otherwise, he would have stuck out like a thumb or whatever it's called, saying, I forget what it is. But so he changed it. And so it was easier for him because of that. And often people say, oh, why didn't you change your name when CBS insisted you change your name and then they call you a difficult artist? And I said, no, because that is my connection to India. And it's not a level playing field. We are just as westernized or just as good in American music as anyone here. And it's not a level playing field. So just because of my name or my color of the skin, you cannot close the doors on us. So that was really the challenge. Perhaps, as I mentioned to the writer in midday, I said, if I changed my name, perhaps CBS would have been happy and the trajectory of my career would have been totally different. And of course, my family would have been much happier. They would have said, thank God we don't have to put up with her shenanigans.
So they had asked you to change your name, I believe. I remember you saying that they wanted from Asha Puthli to become Ann Powers, and you think it would have made a difference who you would have become out there?
It would have made a big difference. Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, because in marketing, as I mentioned to the interview, they're very, very, that was the number one thing. And there's marketing, cognitive dissonance. When you hear Asha Puthli, what do you think of? Sitar, tabla, temple bells, things like that. So they
You mean there?
in the
That's
West,
what they would
in
think
the
of.
West. So you already have a challenge, and so how are we going to promote this artist when she's singing mainstream American music, but she's not changing her name? It sounds like we're marketing somebody who's
You're the only other person I know who wore mini saris besides.
but
You're the only other person I know. You just were taking India and putting it
in a
in a
different
whole other
context.
combo.
Yeah. But to change perceptions takes many, many years. And it's also a thing about for example, now the second generation of Indians who live in America, they have now they are ready. So if Americans or if Indians now go there to start a career, it would be much easier,
Oh yeah.
because there
Whole
is
different
a market, there is
course.
a public that's going to buy their product.
Of course. Of course. We're one of every 7 people on the planet, or
Yeah.
2 of every 7 people on the planet. It's not
Yeah.
now it's like
Yeah.
game over. Anyways, back then when they heard Asha Puthli, they didn't use you thought they'd think sitar and
No,
tablas.
I didn't think. They told me there's cognitive dissonance in marketing. We
Yeah.
cannot market you.
Yeah.
They didn't spell it out to me,
Sure.
and I was too young to understand.
Yeah.
Initially, I thought they were being racist. My
Yeah.
initial impact was they're
Yeah.
being racist.
Yeah, they were.
No, they weren't. They weren't. They were just looking at the bottom line. They were not being racist, and I don't see it as a racist
Sure.
thing. They were just looking at their bottom line. Can we make money? Are we going to lose money? Are we going to be able to? And what they used to say was the blacks are not going to buy you, the whites are not going to buy you. And we've done a group focus study, and Indians don't buy Western music. That was their thing. Okay, all right.
I'm going to pull you back into, a less politicized aspect of it,
Yeah.
but really important
Oh.
for where it went as well.
I
You
remember
remembered.
what it was. The reason I called it Wild Samurai, because most of the people are Sikhs there. And I wanted to bring it that whole international thing of, the wild. That whole album has a lot of Japanese titles like Harakiri Time. Yeah. And believe it or not, the record got released not in London, where the trouble is happening, but in Japan, just because of the titles, I think.
So here you're wearing on this performance, you're wearing a plastic raincoat, a paper dress, a
from
rope
my
belt.
gynecologist. My gynecologist, I'd gone
Yeah.
to see. I said, "Oh, I don't know what I'm going to wear. Oh my God, give me these."
And
Took
a
whole
rope,
handful of the gynecologist.
a big rusty for a belt, and a helmet.
That
Yeah?
it was a concert. The
Yeah.
rope was for the Harakiri Time.
Yeah.
Because that song is about suicide.
Yeah.
And the helmet was probably for another song. I don't know. But Yeah,
paper.
it was just they were all
A paper
props.
dress and a
Paper
plastic.
dress, plastic.
In fact, you said you wanted to come to do this in a saran wrap with
Yeah. Oh, this
plastic
one
wrap with the bra and panty and plastic wrap. That was going to be your costume, remember?
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
know what to wear. And then yeah.
Yeah, I remember you had press. So this again, now, Blondie's Debbie Harry is one amongst those who has cited you as an influence on her fashion, costume, performance, and style. Some of the resonance, let's say, has been a little bit too close for comfort.
Mhm.
The character Veena Apsara in one of the most famous books, The Ground Beneath Her Feet by Salman Rushdie, seems like was almost a straight lift of your life, like identity theft before there was identity theft.
Yeah, in a way, I would say not because, but he is known for his style of writing, which is that magic realism or whatever factional, whatever you call it. People know that he takes real people and then builds on it.
So can you give us a little background of what happened? Salman Rushdie's book, The Ground Beneath Her Feet, came out.
Yeah.
People were approaching you saying, "Hey, there's a book
No,
out about
actually,
you."
I read it somewhere. Someone from India actually said, "Oh, it looks like it's a similar thing like Asha Puthli's life," because
Yeah.
a girl going from India in the '60s, the time period. And when people told me, I said, "Oh, so it's probably about a girl who left in the '60s." And I didn't even read the book because I just didn't read it. And then something strange happened. A few years later, I was having dinner. A girlfriend had thrown a dinner for me. She called me. She said, "Oh, the consul general here is Consul General David Good." And when I told him I'm your friend and I'm having this dinner, he said, "Oh, please seat me next to her. I want to meet her." And so, of course, we were seated next to each other. And apparently, before he became a consul general, he was, a junior officer based in Calcutta. At the time, I was young, and there used to be a magazine called Junior Statesman, which was big then with my generation. And he had read about me in that magazine. And he said, when I read this, now this is a man that I don't know. He's an erudite, obviously, traveled man. So he's not somebody who's trying to, he has nothing to gain by telling me this or, whatever. So I thought it was very strange that a man so coming left field is telling me that when he was young, he read about me, and just having read what he read about me in Junior Statesman, and then reading this book by Salman Rushdie, he knew it was me. So the reason he wanted to sit next to me was, of course, to ask me. His first question to me was, "Oh, he must have been so much in love with you." And I said, "Who?" I said, "I don't even know him." I said, "No, I've never met him."
Just to place a context for this, there are in the book The Ground Beneath Her Feet, there are 91 anecdotes which are an exact replica of incidents from your life. So it wasn't just curiosity that made you question what was going on there.
No, I didn't even question it. I didn't read the book, but after David Good mentioned this, the consul general here, and I was really thinking, oh, maybe if some of my relatives need a visa, it's good for me to know this man. Okay. I said, okay, he can sit next to me. Of course, I'm coming for the dinner. It turned out to be this. So anyway, then
You sat next to him and he
that's it.
This
Oh, yeah.
Salman Rushdie just basically knocked
Yeah.
off your life.
Now, in the interim, I've read the book, and also the young man, the writer, Asjad Nazir, from London, who I'd never met, said he's doing a story on this for the London Times. And when he called me, he said the same question. Do you know him? When did you meet him? I said, no, I've never met him. I said, honestly, I feel I was stalked by newspaper clippings, because that's the feeling you get when you read it. And if you know your own life, of course, you know your own life, and then you sort of, it clicks and say, oh my God, my aunt's name is here. Why is my aunt's name here? And says she adopted me. And in fact, I did live with that aunt. So, and her name, very clear, the same name. The record, the record that I told you about when I was deported from Singapore, the title of that record is Angel of the Morning. And the character is named Veena Apsara. That generation, my generation at that time, who liked English records, and it was like one of the early or first EP with English. So that was like starting from there, and it goes down, of course, and he ends it where this character, Veena Apsara, dies, and they make dolls from her. So the writer who wrote this article said, well, couldn't be more obvious. Asha Puthli. Puthli means doll, he said, you know. So it's like, but that's like, but there were 91 with dates and like Andy Warhol being a good friend of that character that he's created. He's got Freddie Mercury in it. He's got himself in it. Now, of course, when that article came out, he wrote a very strong letter to the Times. I must say, he has a wonderful style of writing. So he wrote, "Oh, Miss Puthli's public relations," or whatever he wrote, "must be chortling with delight." Now, I remember that, chortling with delight, because I thought it was written so well, you know. Except I didn't have any publicist and a PR. And I still don't. So I was a little sort of, you know.
However, so it's happened.
Mhm.
It I mentioned these incidents because, however, so it happened, without a publicist or PR, you seem to have made an impact, not just in a place, but globally. Like I said, Deborah Harry, you've been an influencer for many others that we haven't gone over. We haven't gone over the New York disco years with Studio 54 and Andy Warhol being shot by Avdon. There was that whole subsection that was going on in New York at the time.
Yes.
So yeah, you've been sampled by, as you mentioned, Jay-Z, Diplo, P. Diddy, Notorious B.I.G, 50 Cent, like
50 Cent, yeah. 50
the
Cent.
royalty of hip hop.
50 Cent has done the same song, this world, the Space Talk, and yeah.
Yeah. So that's like
Except he took permission.
direct, live and direct.
Direct.
Yeah. So this is, it's a massive trajectory, my God.
Yeah.
Ornette Coleman, science fiction to disco to electronic to rock and roll to a
Hip-hop.
renaissance in hip hop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they actually kept my music somewhat alive, I would say. Like they
Yeah.
gave me a renewed life with my music, with all this sampling, remixing. There are a lot of young people who have taken that same song and then remixed and remashed it and this and that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I'm very grateful for that. So I
Amazing.
don't mind if they take it, you know.
So you spoke a little bit about the stem of the music from that time to now. I would, in winding up, I think I want to ask you what do you think, or what do you believe in your experience? What is the most valuable part of the creative process as an artist? What's the most valuable part of the creative process?
To be able to move on. To leave what you've created and move on. Yeah. That's it. That's what. Oh, I'm glad you're applauding. Means they're tired. We have to move on now. They're saying
To move on.
Let's just move on.
But literally, do you mean that? It's detachment from your work done
It's,
and not
in a
to be
way.
attached to the work?
In a way, yes. You have to be detached from your work. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's why, if you see, a lot of artists will not have their own albums. Quite often, like people say, like, okay, you all asked me for some high definition pictures. Did I have them? No. Did I have my albums? No. A lot of artists do not even keep their old albums. They can't find them. You know, they've given away the last one thinking that, oh, there's going to be more printed. Don't worry, take it. And then you suddenly realize, hey, it's not being printed again. It's over. Analog days are gone, vinyl's gone. But I must say, thanks to the crate diggers, you know how that evolved, this whole hip hop thing and all. I must thank the grave diggers. No, not grave, crate, but it's like a grave. It is like grave. It is like grave because they were lost records. And the crate diggers were the first ones who took out the vinyl. Everyone asked me, how did P. Diddy and all these guys discover you? And I can only explain it by saying maybe those crate diggers pulled out some vinyls and they were listening to it and said, "Hey, what's this? This is good. Let's take from this one." Because I don't know them personally. I've never met them, you know.
I mean, vinyl is huge, and I know a friend who's a designer who was in Sardinia a couple of years ago. I think I sent you that email. Who was crate digging and pulled out a sealed
Yeah.
vinyl of
Yeah.
yours that was
Yeah.
over the moon at having
Yeah.
found this, because the thing itself is a treasure.
I had to buy my own records.
Yeah.
I had to.
When they were
Honestly.
published.
Yeah, I couldn't find any, and for some reason I needed an album, and I said, "Oh my God!" So I went on eBay and I bought my own records. Yeah, some of them.
So honestly, the best the advice that you would give, or the note to artists who may be here, aspiring, starting out in their careers, or heading towards looking to you for inspiration, is this what you would say is that the most valuable part of the creative process as an artist is to let go?
If they're looking to me for inspiration, I'd say, "God help you." I don't know what. Leaping and bounding. Yeah. Yeah, I think they would do it naturally. An artist would do it automatically. They would do something and evolve from it to their next experience or the next experience, always.
So what's next? What are you doing next, Asha?
In reality,
Yeah. What's next? I don't mean literally right now. I mean in that overall arching. I
in
mean,
overall arching, okay.
You've done
I
a
finished,
movie? You've just
oh,
finished a
yeah,
movie.
I did
Yeah.
2 years ago.
In the lead,
Yeah.
in fact. Yeah.
Yeah. They must be
My,
pretty sorry. But anyway, I did a movie and it's about an older woman. Would you believe it? It's about an older woman and she's very lonely.
You're not.
She's very lonely and she adopts an orphan basically because her children are abroad and da da da. So, but because it addresses two very important issues. One is the loneliness of old age, being alone, and about young homeless orphans. So finally, they got the censorship. It's called Maya. We shot it in 2016, and I think it's coming out eventually. But it went to Iran for the Children's Film Festival. So it's really, but that's really, and then there's the documentary that's coming out. But on a musical thing, yes, I have done a tribute to all, because everyone, based on those two jazz recordings with Ornette Coleman, and then a couple of other recordings with serious jazz musicians, Henry Threadgill, again, one song as a guest artist, Charlie Mariano, one song as a guest artist, but they're all jazz, serious jazz guys. I'm now known as jazz royalty. That's within the jazz. This is the word, this is their phrase. And I keep telling myself, but I'm jazz royalty, but where's my jazz solo album? Because I left the jazz world and went into pop and rock and disco and, as you know, the whole other genre. And so I'm going back to it, to the jazz thing. I've finished an album. I'm looking for the right distribution. But it's a tribute to all the great jazz people I met and sang for or recorded with. And it includes Duke Ellington, Ornette Coleman, Cy Coleman, Lionel Hampton. These are some of, like, they're roads named after these men, So, like, and theaters named after them, but they're legends. But I was lucky enough to meet them when I was very young. But then I didn't want to sing jazz. I mean, not that I didn't want to, but moved on.
Well, your voice is out floating in space for perhaps other species
Yes.
and another dimension to
They're
find.
the
I don't think
only
anything
ones-
can top
They're
that.
the only ones who will love it.
And dance to
Only
it.
ones who will really like it and enjoy.
So we've got space and time with Asha to open it up to you guys. If you want to ask her any questions, we've got time for, I think, a handful of questions from the audience, if anybody would be interested. If you have anything to ask Asha about her experience or her background.
Throughout the journeys of producing all of your albums, like through the 70s and I think up to the 80s, every time you had a shift with how your mind was perceiving what you want to make out of the music you were making, how would you find these producers? Because I've noticed in every album they were like different producers. So would you go out finding these guys yourself, or was it the labels who would decide this for you?
Labels,
So
the
it's pretty
labels.
much the labels straight up.
Well, usually, yes, it was the labels. They'd give me a choice. The very first album, they gave me a choice. Holland, Dozier Holland. um, Rick Perry. He was then busy with Streisand, depending on who it was. And I chose Del Newman because he was available. Del Newman is a wonderful producer. He worked with at that time he worked with Elton John on Yellow Brick Road, and with I don't remember, but it'll come to me. But what they do is they present me with options. So that first album, I was given an option. The second album, for which I was shelved, I had no choice on some of the CBS just thrust a guy called Paul Phillips on me as because he was in-house producer. This is because at this point they didn't want to invest anymore, basically. And then I decided to finish that album in New York, where Van McCoy, who became very famous 2 years later after we did that album with the hustle. I don't know if you ever heard that song. Do the hustle. Do you remember that one? Okay. So he became very disco, the start of disco. And Litio Macero, who was a jazz producer, but we had three producers on that. The third album, the producer went to CBS, Schallplatten in Germany. I said, look, Donna Summer and people have stolen everything. And they were playing her record throughout the sessions and saying, sound like Asha, telling Donna, sound like this, sound like this. No, do this, do this, do this, and stretch the line. So the producer went up to CBS. And that's how that third. So it depends on which album, and it's all different. The fourth album, again, CBS got the producer,
And then you
Belgium.
moved out of CBS after that.
Yes, because I'd given them choices. When I got suspended for the first 5-term contract, 5-year, 5-album contract, um, I told the next one, the minute that finished, I had other offers in New York coming out from people, and I was worried that they might sit on me because it had happened to Aretha Franklin when she signed with CBS. They sat on her, and it was only after and what a great talent who just passed away, last year, and they sat on her till Atlantic Records took her under their wing, and that's when Atlantic was decided to produce artists, black American artists, for white audiences. It was very color divided in those days. And then I left CBS because I decided that because with Clive Davis there, I had a feeling he is not going to let it happen. Because when Germany CBS said, the producer Dieter Zimmermann had gone to them and said, look, they've stolen everything. She could have been the biggest thing and blah, blah, blah. The head of CBS, Schallplatten, called me and said, CBS London has destroyed your career by doing what they did, by suspending you and not releasing those albums. So they said, we are going to do something. So I said, okay, I'll give you a choice. You can have me for 1 year, provided you bring that album out in the States. They couldn't. They approached CBS in the States. New York Times gave a whole huge write-up. Writing at the bottom, Robert Palmer, who used to write before for Rolling Stone, now wrote it in the New York Times, saying, CBS is making a major mistake not releasing an artist of this caliber, but CBS wouldn't budge. So when that record became a hit in Italy and in Europe, parts of Europe, Italians said, oh, we don't want to let her go. Let us offer a contract quickly before we lose her. So they came up with that fourth, or is it the fifth? One, two, three, four, fourth CBS album called La Indiana, which was done for Italian CBS. At which point I said, unless, same thing, if CBS does not release this, I'm not signing with you anymore in America. I knew they were dead set against me, CBS, and I was determined to get it out on CBS. That's why I'd signed the very first solo album when I was offered with EMI, Johnny Franz, and CBS. I deliberately chose, when it was a bidding war, I chose CBS for that reason, because I wanted to get on a level playing field with people who are nixing it constantly, like Clive Davis, who said, "Oh, she won't sell." Do you know that? I don't know if you were here when we talked about it. So,
Yeah, I heard it.
yeah.
About it.
So that's really what happened. Then I signed with Polygram. And even that last album, La Indiana, when I did it for Italians, they sent it to CBS. CBS said, "No, we are not going to release it. Neither do we want you to have it released through anyone else." At which point, CBS Italy said, "They can't bully us. We are going to release it." And they released it with TK Records, which was a disco label. But that's why I mentioned about corporate hierarchy, about the corporate, the politics that goes on. So the artist really gets squished in all this stuff. And when you're an artist, and if you do business or do the deals yourself, you get further squished because your left brain is not working anymore. You become so addicted to doing deals that your right brain takes over. And the win is so exciting. The fact that you make that deal, that it happened, is so exciting that you become less of an artist, actually.
Yeah, thanks.
Such a long
it's also one
answer.
more thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah,
I think
you're
it's
probably
after the
probably sorry you
polygram.
even
No, no,
asked
no.
me.
I could hear you talk forever. But I think after the polygram signing, I think after
Three
that is
album.
when your music actually started coming to India on records.
Really?
Yeah,
Because
that's
there was a
according. Yeah,
polygram here.
because
Yeah.
there was a polygram sign.
Yeah, I met the man. Shashi Patel was his name, right? And he brought out that one record on Polygram, India, but there wasn't an audience for that kind of stuff here, really. There was no audience. So CBS had offered me CBS catalog for free in 1976. They said, "Please take this," and to, you know, Dick Asher, who was so upset when CBS America said they will not release The Devil Is Loose, which had great reviews and everything. And when they said that, he took me down to in the building, CBS building. He said, "I'm going to cry. I cannot take this anymore, the corporate stuff. And he used to manage BB King before. He said, the only twice that I felt like crying is when they did this with BB King. They rejected his stuff. And now they're doing it with you, both under my wing. You were two artists I had under my wing that I believed in." So, yeah. Again, I've strayed away from your question, but never mind.
I think it had to do with, again, context. They just didn't have a context for you. It's like,
Yeah.
when Black American music of the time, there was no way to bring it into the primarily white audience, and it was done finally through Elvis. Right? Elvis took black music and became the medium for it to be fed out into a white audience, because would have never been accepted from a black artist.
But it was still considered white music.
Well,
brought it.
because he was doing it, but
Because
we
he
all
was
know
doing
that
it.
it was he was.
Later, we found out. That it was
Yeah,
black
of
music.
course.
Yeah.
I mean, from my generation, we all know that Elvis was,
Yes.
using black
Yeah.
music to
Absolutely.
feed it out to the companies were using it to feed it out to a white audience.
Yes.
And it had to do with context. I mean,
Yes.
today we've got, as you know, so many. I mean, there's untold number of people, but I'd referenced MIA before also, who still speaks about not having, credit or a context or space. She's having trouble releasing a record even today.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think it has a lot to do with context also of the time and space, and what sells.
I'll tell you a funny story. Ahmet Ertegun who made a big name for himself because he started Atlantic Records with Nesui Turtig and his brother. And I went up to Amit. I said, Amit, I don't understand it. You all say I'm amazing, I'm so fabulous, blah, blah, blah. Put your money where your mouth is. Now, why don't you sign me to Atlantic? And he said, Asha, but you're Indian. He actually spelt it out for me. He said, but you're Indian. Like, but you're Indian. And I said, but Amit, you're Turkish. I said to him, you know. So he said, yes, Asha, that's exactly why I'm sitting where I'm sitting, which is what he meant was he was behind the desk. He was the chairman of one of the largest corporations in the world, Atlantic Records. But he had started Atlantic Records for black artists to as with white audience, to give it to the white audience. So there was no room, believe me. The whole idea that I was Indian, the face, the look. This blonde hair came later when I got, gray hair. I went blonde.
Anybody else? Anyone? A question up there?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for these fantastic stories, and
My pleasure.
I really love the honesty with which you present the music business. It's no fluff, and my question is kind of ambiguous, but I'm going to try nonetheless. In the last so many years that you've been involved with the music industry and have made records, you just mentioned that you worked on a new album. I just want to know, how has the process of making a record evolved for you? Like going into the studio, turning on the microphone, the board, the music, the artists, and how has that experience changed for you?
Major change. Major. Because in the old days, you got very pampered. As you know, we used to get royalties, we got big advances, limousines sent to pick us up, the whole thing, flowers. I mean, you have a baby, the whole room becomes a florist shop. That kind of the great amount of generosity from the companies, right? Today, this jazz album, I call it a mattress album. Let me tell you, I call it a mattress album because these days, and I do sympathize with young people like you who are now trying to make records all over the world, because it's a DIY number now. There are no big labels doling out money to make that album. You have to do it all yourself. But on the other hand, you also have the gadgets to do it yourself, which we didn't have. We were totally reliant on major companies which had those big things, and they had those 2-inch and 48 tracks and floating, whatever it's called, floors. And we don't need those now. You're blessed, you're lucky, you have the ease with which you can make it. If I can make my album in a mattress, I call it a mattress because I couldn't find, it's jazz. Nobody wanted to put money, right? So a girlfriend of mine said, no, we use my apartment, use my house. I said, okay. We go there and we've rented a mic. We've rented, and of course, everything else is probably the way you work on a computer, with all the stuff, the attachments and this and that. Children are screaming outside. This is in Los Angeles. I said, oh my God, what did I get into? So we put all the mattresses up against the wall. That's why I call it the mattress album. Yeah.
That is amazing. Thank you so much.
But that's how it's changed, major way.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
Asha, thank you so much,
Thank you.
everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.